It's been a few years since the incident. Actually, about 11 to be exact. I'm a teenager now, but sadly that feels like it only happened yesterday. I am deeply haunted by nightmares of the fire. In fact, that's how I woke up today. Cold sweat and a weak throat. My body feels as though I'm chained to the bed, reacting to everything as if I was back in that horrible place again. Paralyzed and unable to help. That bastard's enriched cackle echoed through my skull, only to get louder and louder. Like today, there were countless mornings where I wake up screaming at the top of my lungs. No! 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 Stop it! I sat there, covered in sweat, as I trembled within my skin. Usually my bed would be an utter mess on days like these, due to me thrashing about like a caged animal. I hate to admit it, but more often than not I had to wash my sheets, due to the amount of sweat. I held my head in my fists, tightening as small, feeble breaths escaped my lips. I'm slowly coming to terms with reality again, and the shivers dissipate. Within moments, I heard a knock at the door as a voice bellowed out.
Oi, Rue! You doing alright in there, kid? I'm coming in, alright?
This voice was that of John's. After the fire, I had no one to go to. Our whole town was destroyed and my mother was killed. Edith was okay, though. In the morning, some of the adults in the town gathered everyone together to assess the damages. Our town's population was less than 50, but from the slaughter it knocked us down to less than 24. Mass graves were enacted, and I was able to bury my mother with the help of Edith's dad, Philip. Back then, I thought my mother was sleeping. I was so confused. It took an awful long amount of time coming to terms with everything and her being gone. I'd asked people around the town if they saw her or if she woke up from her nap. No one had the heart to tell me. One of the survivors in the town was named John. He was a hardened older man with huge farm muscles and a glorious white beard, an entirely bald head. He was well over 6 foot tall. He was one of the stronger men in the town. You see, John owns a ranch dedicated to reforming the troubled youth around Terenzian. If you were a bad kid, you were sent here to learn physical labor and respect. I came here because I wanted a dad. When I showed up at his door, he looked at me for a moment and just hugged me. There were no words. Everyone in town knew what happened, and he was no exception. I was just a 5-year-old kid, ugly crying into this brute of a man, and all he did was squeeze. Maybe I came to him because I knew he was strong, or that he was the only one I knew of who could protect me from the bandits. Before the raid, we were a small hamlet town in the middle of the Arginian plains, living peacefully and producing crops to sell in the big city. We were under their territory, but we never had any sort of government controlling us. We didn't have any guards or anything, so the closest person to authority here was John, who owned a private ranch, and he did a small service for the people of the town. The continent of Cal is incredibly religious, and we worship one of the farming gods here. His name is Drowie, and he is what we call the pawn of farmland, harvest, weather, healing, fertility, nutrition, and the culinary arts. You see, there are 32 gods on our continent. Each one of them represents a piece on the chessboard. Starting with one of the more important figures, you have Aces, the king of good, knowledge, charity, honesty, war, and wisdom, patience, and arcane magic. Every single god stands to represent an amalgamation of different aspects of our reality. According to the history of the continent, the older gods grew to represent, or the new ones were born of, the new personality traits exhibited in the early stages of man. When the humans were first walking around, they discovered the new behaviors that they explored. Like with the invention of currency and trading came prostitution. There are now 2 gods that represent the core features of bartering and buyable intercourse. There are gods that also have nothing to do with people. Like, for example, there is Ver. She is the queen of nature, seasons, rebirth, Plants, beasts, overgrowth, healing, verdancy, vegetation, thorns, and life. Each of the gods has a scion and an archbishop. In terms of the right and left hand, the scion is the right-hand entity of power, the direct underling and the champion of the god, for whatever that means to each of these super powerful beings. The archbishop is closer to that of the left-hand man, the direct mortal underling that is the highest of acolytes. This individual is a super worshipper and will receive direct messages from the gods to spread among their people and sometimes to the rest of the world. So what I mean to say by all of this is that we had a smaller priest of Drowie, the farm god, in our town. When the bandits came, he was killed and the church was destroyed. John, my adoptive father, would have been second in charge to the priest. Since he's no longer alive, the closest figure of authority is him. So when the fires died and the bodies were recovered, John sent a letter to the Queen of Arginia. Her name is Queen Jade, and she is the result of the death of 2 Arginian kings over the course of the civil war between the aforementioned 30 Mile City and Mythal, the Elven City. In his letter, he explained about the ambush and request for a push in citizens to move to our damaged town and populate the buildings, the farms, and assist with the rebuild effort. He also asked for a station of guards and a military to be set in place in the town. As payment for this in the future, a new generation of Terenzian boys or girls will be sent off to the big city to help replace the lost soldiers here as a new regiment of foot soldiers. Soon after, a captain moved in here, along with a team of guards. Swarms of people came here to help with the rebuilding, and soon enough, our population jumped towards 80 people, including the soldiers. Things started climbing towards normalcy, but it was all too quick and harsh for me to understand at the time. Carefully blinking and breathing away my tears, my bedroom door creaked open. With that, John walked in and gave a hefty sigh before plopping beside me and rubbing my neck for support. I had so much to thank him for. That man could have turned a runt like myself away. I could have easily fallen to the life of dismay and be damned for what would have been, what would have become of me. However, he took me in, seeing as I didn't need to be reprimanded or taught, but I needed a home, more so a family. The burly man, despite him seeming stoic from his long beard to his rough calluses and exterior, when not working, he was hearty, having the spirit of a fireplace, helping those around him whilst believing in loyalty and honesty. He sighed, rubbing my back slow.
You had the nightmare again. You're getting worse, Rue. You sound like you're getting tortured up here. I'm getting worried, buddy. It ain't healthy.
He made a fumbled expression beneath his graying stash, knowing that he couldn't help me with what ailed me. I could see in his aging face how much it bothered him that I, at the ripe age of 16, suffered ailments seen in those who venture or fight for our lands. With that, I took in a shaky breath, looking over to him and offered a small smile. I'm all right, John. Don't worry. I'll be okay. I promise, I said before standing. It was obvious that he didn't believe me. He always knew. John only smirked, with a chuckle, and he stood up, messing my long summer locks before walking out.
Food's on the table. Also, don't you forget that Edith gal is looking forward to tonight. She even ran over yesterday to remind you. So make sure that you doll yourself up for the young lass. She's a good one!
He winked before walking away with a loud, hearty laugh as he went to wake up the other ones at the ranch. With that, my face felt hot as I grabbed some of my finer garments since I planned on bathing in a few minutes. Just the idea that she wanted to attend the festival tonight rose butterflies. I had known Edith my whole life practically, and to me, she was so much more than beautiful. Everything about her only made me fall further and further in love. As we got older, we found ourselves in each other's company more often than ever. Over time, I was not the only one who appreciated her. She became a favorite at the bread stand that her father ran. with travelers often flirting and offering her so much more than our humble town. I really couldn't blame them, really. She had beautiful waves of hickory, her skin soft and peachy with beauty marks scattered about, two beautiful, loving eyes that attracted often much attention due to their odd nature. Many also commented on her having a nice figure when speaking of her, or often the fact that her attitude needed to be checked. But why would you ever want to change the very thing that made her like no other? Why try and tame a wild soul like hers? I loved that about her. I loved seeing her go and laugh at crude humor or foolishly act in front of a crowd to get a laugh out of those around her. I enjoyed the times of venturing into the woods with her and the others, running through the lush fields, climbing through the sturdy wood, and visiting the hidden brook. No matter what she did, she wouldn't change for anyone. She always stayed authentic to herself, and I loved that the best. I felt honored she trusted me enough to show these sides of her. Many years after the incident, it took a while to find a path once more, but when I was with her, I felt complete. I felt as though I was okay again, like I had nothing on my shoulders to weigh me down till I fell to my knees begging for peace. With her, I felt free. Minutes pass as I was now clean, and I dressed into some rather nicer clothing. As I sighed, promising I'd go into town to help setting up beforehand, I felt a lump in my throat as nerves arose at the thought of the festival. So after eating a bit of what John left for me, I put my hair up before heading into town. Around me, folks were bustling to get things set up. After all, the events were not the only thing important to us, but they also attracted travelers who often helped with gaining funds for our town and market as a whole. Patrons rushed up to put up their stands, lanterns carefully being lit. As I helped bring some boxes here and there to the certain stands. It was always chaotic before a festival, but it was always worth the stress. Soon after the festival began, music blasted forth as colorful lanterns lit up the event with a gentle glow. Streamers swayed with a gentle breeze, loud music played, lighting up the scene. Colors were everywhere as people shopped, ate, and danced the afternoon away. I kept finding myself pulled away by the townsfolk to have a chat, despite me locking eyes with Edith, who often snickered. She was obviously amused while she was at her stand. Sure, I didn't mind conversating with them, but I had someone who I'd rather spend time with this evening. Eventually, the young men started to get drunk, and I had noticed Edith was released from the stand. With a smile, I made sure to meet up with her. I wasn't going to let anyone else distract me. I glanced around for her by the fountain before I jumped, feeling two small arms with a good grip embracing me from behind. "Lovely, aren't they?" I heard from behind, recognizing that voice anywhere. With a tender smile, I turned to face Edith, only to be in awe of how beautiful she looked. She had done her hair neatly with a soft little bow alongside a more fitted gown of a more soft periwinkle sort of hue. It's a beautiful dress. I chuckled softly before retrieving something wrapped in cloth from my pocket. "Yeah, here, I made this for you. I hope you like it." I watched as Edith opened it to see a small bear carving. Her face, to my surprise, lit up as she hugged me again, giggling. "I love it, Rue! Thank you!" she said with a grin, holding my arm. I chuckled as we then looked around at the stands for a small bit, admiring her curiosity at stands from the merchants and those with far-off sort of trinkets. Soon after, Edith found the food area, dragging me over with a gasp. Despite her small stature, she surprisingly had a decent amount of strength on her. The food there smelled absolutely amazing, with a nice array of specialty meals that were only saved for special occasions. I chuckled, shocked to find her buying a rather large turkey leg. And though it startled me how she managed to eat the whole thing, it also kind of didn't in a way. I was so impressed. After that, we talked a bit more, before I was grabbed once again by some of my friends. I chuckled, trying to explain myself as they dragged me to the dance floor. During this, I saw her huff. However, I saw that cheeky little classic smirk of hers. She had a plan to get me back some way or another. After a bit, I heard my name shouted out as she ran towards me, open arms. With a smile, I graciously caught her in an embrace. I spun her around only to set her down. Her laughter caused my cheeks to flush as we danced together to the happier music twirling around as she would sometimes sing along, knowing the old hymns by heart. Eventually, a semi-slower tune began to play, as to give the fellas a slight breather. Still upbeat, but not as erratic as before. I remember just how beautifully her eyes twinkled beneath the lit lanterns. Her soft cheeks flush as we slowly danced together, as the world around me didn't matter anymore. I remember the entire night I felt nothing but anxiety. What if I messed up? What if I ruined tonight for her? All of that melted away as I realized I never had to act to begin with. I could be me around her. In that moment, whilst admiring her, I realized what I truly wanted out of life. I wanted to be happy, and more so than that, I wanted nothing more to be happy with her. The thought of this made my heart sore, and yet a lump caught deep within my throat, feeling another familiar unease. I shook my head slightly, ignoring this, when I found my gaze catching Edith's. I noticed her glancing at my lip and I at hers for a moment, before I made the decision to kiss her tenderly, and I felt myself swoon as I felt her soft lips curl into a gentle smile. With that, we separated, both blushing shyly and hearing teasing from our friends. We spent a good chunk of the festival together, before retreating somewhere away from the crowds. Terenzium was a vast land of long, rolling hills and plains, with plots of forage amongst the eye's farthest view of it all. Sure, it wasn't the biggest place to be, but it always felt ever so peaceful. We laid behind one of the trees together, hugging by the plush grass below. As we were met with a vast variety of stars, in this moment, the dread within me returned as I glanced at her, knowing a terrible reality. I listened to her speak fondly of what she wanted for the future, what she planned on doing with her life. The more I laid and listened to her speak, the more my heart ached knowing the full truth of what was to come. I sat up beside her before cupping her soft cheek within my hands, only to kiss her again. I felt her kiss back before I separated once more. It felt amazing, as the one of the festival, yet bittersweet in a kind way. I cleared my throat before looking out as I held her in my arms. I need to tell you something. I'm going off tomorrow to Orginia to join the Civil War efforts against Mythal. With everything going on, I wanted to make something for myself. I have to protect everyone. That was only the partial truth. When I was younger and the wound was still fresh, I wanted to go off. I saw it as a way to forget everything and, in fact, make something of what's left of me. But as time went on, I grew to love working on the ranch. I loved helping those in town and putting in a hard day's work. But most of all, I cherished the relationships I had created since then, especially the one that I had with Edith. I wanted nothing more than to stay here with her, possibly marry her, and just overall live life happy and content. But I knew it wasn't in my hands. I was one of the few that were promised to be the replacement fleet in the war efforts. It wasn't my decision, unless I wasn't up to par physically, which sadly I was in great shape to train with the troops. I felt my heart sink as I watched her quickly look up at me, her eyes wide with shock. In that moment, I knew that I crushed a part of her spirit, and if I'm being honest, that hurt more than anything in this moment. When we made our way back to town, I walked her home. Only a small bit of words were exchanged. I could sense her dismay, and it was eating me alive that I had to do this to her. She hugged me tightly, and when we finally got to her home, her grasp desperate, as I recall her arms trembling. She wasn't like her usual self. I knew this upset her, and I embraced her tightly, gently patting her head before giving her a soft kiss on the forehead. I will come back for you. I promise. I will come back for you. I promise this. All I could hear was her weakly muttering under her breath, her usual soft, loving tone, now weak and heartbroken. You have to. You must. You have to keep your promise to me, Rue. She sniffled, shaking only slightly. We both knew that I made a broad promise, considering the circumstance. However, I was determined to keep it. I had to. For her. With that, I gently wiped her tears before she gave me a small peck, and then walked into her home after saying a few words. Just know that I love you. Come back to me, please. Those last words ate at me as I made my way to John's house, running my hand through my hair, puzzled, but more so at unease over what I had just done. I looked up to see John waiting for me, a bit confused on why he had a bottle of whiskey in his hand and 2 glasses. He gave me a look to follow him as his smoke's fumes accompanied us to the roof. I sat beside him as he handed me a glass of liquor, blowing smoke out of his cigar as he stared out over the horizon.
So, it's finally here. The day you're leaving to go off and fight. To be honest with you, I didn't think it would come this quickly. I thought there was still some time, you know.
John, I know I'm leaving tomorrow, but I'm a bit confused, I said, taking a sip from my glass, feeling it burn my throat as it made its way down. I saw him sigh as a gentle smile crept across his face. Yet it wasn't like how it usually was. He seemed to be upset as he cleared his throat.
I didn't expect I would have to say goodbye to you so soon. You know, Rue, you're like a son to me. Ever since that day, I've seen you like that. I remember when you had to chase after the herd after some of the newcomers startled old Janice. She always took a liking to you.
I laughed a bit with him as we reminisced over the old memories of our cow. Memories of me as a kid chasing after a fox that tried to eat the chickens. When I was older and helping him with the new recruits and raising horses for the guards. As we drank, I sighed and we laughed over those times. Moments I wish I could have had more of. Dad, He ruffled my hair to let me know it was all right. Dad, I'm really thankful for all that you've given me. I owe you my life.
Don't say that there. You made this old bastard's life a lot more interesting. Besides, sure, it'd be nice to keep you here on the ranch, maybe inherit it, but I made a promise for our town. Besides, it's an honorable thing for you to fight for Argenia.
We continued to exchange words before half the bottle was gone. He had more than I did. As we headed inside, he stopped me, pulling me into a strong hug.
You know, I'm proud of you, son. I love you. Remember that, always. And remember you'll always have a home here, he said with a warm embrace.
I teared up a little as I hugged him back, knowing John was getting older in his years, so the thought of leaving him here also ate at me. He was the one who helped save me. In my eyes, he was my dad, and I smiled before I looked at him. I love you too. Hey, I'll see you in the morning. And if I don't, I want to say thank you For everything. I mean it. With that, and him handing me his own personal dagger to remember him by, I went to bed. My heart is heavy with sorrow, but content. The next morning, I had woken up much later than I normally would have. Today was officially the day that I was leaving for my town for the first time. It was a weird sensation. The sensation of dread shivered down my spine, but the ache in my heart of leaving Edith stung worse than my creeping anxiety. The air smelled of the usual manure and flowers, a smell that only a country boy finds pleasant. So one of the things that remind you of home in a way, that rewards hard work and sweat with love and a feast. This would be happening very quickly. When the militant carts are to arrive, I'm supposed to climb on board with my belongings, sit, cry, and wait. I would be going off to war. My breaths became shallow, but at least I didn't wake up to another screaming nightmare. Seems as though I was granted permission to a wonderful, trauma-free night. The sun was shining through my window, and the chickens were going nuts. I hope someone fed them. There's quite a few people here on our ranch, but then again, some of them are too irresponsible to give a damn about what goes on here. Others are reformed and they care. There's different levels of respect at the ranch. I groggily stood up and inhaled deep. It turned into a yawn as I stretched outwardly. I had prepared everything that I was going to take into the city a few days ago. Could you tell that I was nervous? You'd never know. So with this, I grabbed my backpack and made my way outside to say my good mornings to my dad and Edith. When I walked outside, the ranch was empty. Empty so far as there were a few children wandering about doing their chores. But I couldn't find John. Maybe he went into town for some supplies. That wasn't too far-fetched of an idea. So I made my way to the market district. Here, people were still cleaning up the leftover streamers, trash, and miscellaneous carnage. I couldn't see him anywhere. Confused, I knocked on Edith's door, and her father answered, sending the scent of dough up my nose. "Good morning, Philip. I had a question for you. Have you seen Edith or my dad?" Philip wiped his floury hands on his apron and wiped his brow.
Nah, kid. Hadn't seen her since I sent her for water. That was about 2 hours ago, so I contacted your father to go look for her. I took a couple of the guards with her, but that's the last I heard of him. I was gonna hang up shop temporarily to go look for her. Have the girls look after the store real quick. If you give me a second, I'll walk with you to the river.
With this, I nodded and Philip went inside. There was some muffled chatter between Gwen and Matilda, Edith's sisters, alongside yelling. Soon after, the three of them came outside.
They have decided they're coming with...
I looked over at the girls and they were both matching the same grumpy, arms-crossed dagger stare. Gwen piped up. "It's your fault for sending her to the river. We have a perfectly good well here right outside of our goddamn house." Philip shrunk into himself.
I know. I just wanted to give her the opportunity to not wait in line for an hour.
Well, now it's been 2. The 4 of us marched our way to the river, where we saw what seemed to be the aftermath of a carnage of sorts. My body radiated an aggressive heat as fear shriveled down my spine. At the base of the river is the bucket that Edith took with her, shattered and splintered across the rocks. I ran over and fell to my knees, staring down at the wreckage. I held some of the pieces in my fingers and squeezed them tightly, noticing the faint blood splashed around the area. Tears started to well up in my eyes as I played through every instance of what could have possibly happened here. Underneath some of the pieces of shards are shreds of a blue dress. Her dress. I grit my teeth as I quickly stuffed it into my pocket and shot a glance back towards Philip. I hadn't noticed, but this whole time Gwen and Matilda were screaming at their dad. I must have drowned out the sound. "You stupid fuck! This is your fault! What don't you understand about this? Where the hell is John, huh? Where the hell are the guards? Where the fuck is my sister?" Philip was trying to hold it together, but tears fell from his face. I felt bad as he was being berated, but then again, an inkling of this was his fault. She didn't have to come here for water, nor did she have to go alone. At this point, Gwen was losing her voice from yelling.
Why did you wait so long before going after her? What flipped in your fucking head that made you decide, why haven't I seen Edith? Usually she takes 5 minutes to get to the goddamn water. Let me wait another hour and a half.
Philip was silent, struggling for words, but he had nothing. He knew that he messed up. Matilda was searching through the water and found Edith's shoes. Instead of walking out on the water and giving them to me, she threw them at her dad's feet, splashing him with water in the process. I heard a large collection of hoofbeats and chains clattering towards the main road. I glanced over to see the Arginian military arriving with a collection of foot soldiers clad in a wondrous set of armor, painted white and red, and the symbol of the royal family plastered onto their shields and shoulder, a boar with wings. A quick thought jettisoned into my mind. That's gonna be me. Soon after, Matilda found another object, a cigar. My stomach dropped and acid gurgled up into the back of my throat. That was the cigar my dad was smoking last night. Something happened to all of them. A man with a heavier set of armor steps off from one of the carts, standing tall and broad, holding his hands out to the townsfolk.
All right, lads and lasses, we're gonna make this quick. You have 5 minutes to grab your shit, hug mama and dada, and get your ass on my cart. We have a list of who's coming, and if we wait any longer, I'm dragging you on and putting a strike on your record before we arrive. Anyone who arrives to boot camp with a strike will start tomorrow off with burning the rations we have set aside for the whole regiment. Your fellow soldiers will watch you burn their food at no one's fault but your own. This is your first lesson. Look around you. The kids that you grew up with here and have a nasty tumor growing on your side. If you don't take care of it, it'll pop and fuck you up, pulling you down along with the rest of your comrades. They are your family. Once again, you have 3 minutes. Get your ass here.
I slammed my fists into the gravel and made my knuckles bleed. I shouted and cursed, gritting my teeth and breathing hard. Matilda was crying, still not speaking, and Gwen was pounding her arms into Philip, slewing more profanity and berating ventilation. Where the hell is Edith? Where the hell is my dad? This can't be happening. I made a promise. I was gonna say goodbye. Philip turned to me.
Listen, kid, I know this is horrific, and I'm nothing but apologetic, but you need to get up there. We're gonna finish this. We'll figure this out.
I started screaming out for Edith, receiving nothing in return. I shot my eyes out in every direction, looking for anything that could help me find her. I don't know how long I was there. Time seemed obsolete, as the only thing that mattered to me was her.
We're looking for a Rhumeim bellow. Where are you, kid? You know the drill.
This was infuriating. I didn't know what to do. I slammed my fist into the wreckage once more and stood up, facing the military captain. He slowly caught my eye and nodded, walking towards me. He looked around at the bloody carnage, and with Gwen screaming and the tears flowing from everyone, he sensed that something was wrong. The man stood well over a foot taller than me, resting his hand on his longsword.
Listen, kid, you need to get your ass on the cart. I'm not gonna drag you there, but you will be receiving a strike. Just come along quietly.
He paused for a moment.
And I'm sorry for your loss.
He placed his large hand on my shoulder. This was my cue to move. I begrudgingly choked back a sob and slowly walked towards the rest of the soldiers. I looked back at Philip, and he nodded towards me, wishing me a silent good luck and goodbye, kid. The girls waved and shouted their goodbyes, obviously attempting to ignore the horrific event that just occurred for a tiny moment. I realized they were doing it for me, as a way for them to soften the abhorrency of the situation, but despite their efforts, it didn't work. I chose to wallow into myself and quake, stepping onto the cart and sitting down. Around me, there were around 20 teenagers, male and female, staring daggers into me, seeming as if I was the only one who received a strike. Everyone knew what this meant, and so did I, but I didn't care. I was trapped in my head, repeating the final words of my father, numbing myself to a catatonic drip, mumbling on the various things that I now blame myself for. The things I didn't do better, the things that I didn't say, the things that I didn't accomplish quicker, the things that I didn't do. I'm so sorry.